Good morning. I hope everybody's having a good morning. We're in the middle of the week, and I hope everybody's week is going well. Today, we're going to pick up a couple of things that I think are important in Trail of Lightning. Excuse me. One of them will be the dichotomies that are set up in the play or in the novel. Excuse me. And the other one is the trickster. I've mentioned him a couple of times, and I want to talk in detail about what a trickster is. As always, here's a preview of what's coming up. Group A is in class today. Writing lab on Friday will be Natalie, Jordan, Alyssa, and Andre. Then we're just going to keep going. Remember that next week, some of the presentations will be a little short so that we can do some paper editing and revising in class and help everybody get that final paper firmed up. Dichotomy. We're going to talk about dichotomies. We've talked about them before several times, but I think that in particular for this novel, they hold things together. The definition, as I think you guys should remember, is a literary technique that consists of dividing something into two parts. Frequently, these parts are mutually exclusive. In Henrietta Lacks, for example, we had immortal cells versus the mortal body. In The Life We Bury, we had tons of truth and tons of lies. Ordinary Grace doesn't do this a lot, but it is very, very clear that the narrator is talking about the past and how it's affected his present. Knowledge and ignorance in Henrietta Lacks. There were things that they were ignorant of. There were things that the cells did to improve everybody's knowledge base. Life We Bury, when it comes to taking care of his brother, there's duty versus being irresponsible. And in An Ordinary Grace, we had faith versus unbelief as a dichotomy running through the entire novel. Two parts that are mutually exclusive. So if we look on page 1, okay, we've got the idea of this carnivore's unwashed flesh. We've got the term fouls the evening air, stretching beyond smell to something deeper, more base, versus something that is clean, something that is innocent, something that is alive. And we've got, unwashed flesh, death, carnivore. Those two things are opposite. And again, monster, monster slayer, in this case, the monster and the innocent girl. And then we have the idea of clans and the idea of obligations that clans have to each other, and the idea of clans as family versus it's better all around if we just stay strangers. In other words, clans denote for Maggie the sense of duty, the sense of obligation, the sense of belonging, the sense of family. And as you go through this novel, one of the things you'll see is she's developing a sense of family with people who aren't blood relation. She's almost developing her own clan by the time we get to the end of the novel. And they owe each other because of what they go through together. Also, you've got this idea of observing tradition and not observing tradition in here that's implied as well, and that too is part of Maggie. And then there's this idea of which I think are opposite, beauty and bloodshed. And here you'll notice that the dichotomy is set up in a couple other ways, because there's earth, which is something that's always been here, and self, which is temporary, and beauty and calm versus bloodshed and violence, which is not calm. And again, you're getting a look at Maggie's life. All right. There are moments of beauty, there are moments of peace, but overshadowing everything is the sense of bloodshed. And very, very seldom is there a sense of balance. This is one of those few times, and there's a bit of an irony here because it sets up bloodshed as well. So early in the novel, not only do we get the character as the exposition, not only do we get the place as part of the exposition, but we get these dichotomies that set up the tone that's going to be taking place in the novel. Okay. And then we got cats and dogs. I might be pushing this one a little bit, but notice that Maggie falls into the cat category. The monster falls into the dog category as they're fighting. And so there's, I think, just an important element here. And human and monster, cat and dog working together. As a person who likes cats, it's good to see the cats identified with the humans. And then you have the us versus them. Okay. The Navajo versus the Bilanganas. The Navajo being for Maggie the us, the Bilanganas being them. As we're readers, I don't believe any of us are part of the Navajo tradition, so we are kind of outsiders looking in. But it's an us versus them, one way or another. And also, you just have these two belief set things. One of them sees it as a sickness. It's not just a spiritual concept or the deeds of a bad man, but it's an actual sickness, something that should be able to be cured, versus evil that we may never get rid of. And then again, we've talked about this several times, monster versus monster slayer, one or the other. You can't be both. And again, the idea of dichotomy is that you can't be both, young and old. I can be younger than some people, but I'm no longer young. You can be older than other people, but you don't get to call yourselves old. Then we have this idea of the shanty town, and there's a bit of irony with the idea of a metropolis. I think that this is important, though. Remember that this is an urban fantasy, and so it's going to be the biggest city, so everything's going to fall into the idea of the metropolis. And then you have mortal versus immortal. We've talked about that before. Nesgahani was different and immortal. Around him, I didn't worry. But with other people, flesh and blood and human, I don't think I want that responsibility. Once again, you'll notice that ties into family versus strangers. One of the things that I think Roanhorse does exceptionally well here is I don't want friends or family. I want this sense of belonging, but I don't want the responsibility. And then ties that into mortal versus immortal and ties that into her character and hints about Nesgahani's character. Please remember that dichotomies do not exist in and of themselves. Dichotomies exist to illustrate other things. And then finally, I think for this section, created versus born. Okay? The monster was created, and it's not born, it's not something natural. And so the idea that somebody created the monster, that somebody made this monster, I think is an important thing. It, again, moves the novel forward. It's natural versus unnatural. Those sorts of things are a big chunk of this novel. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the trickster. And there are two animals that are part of the trickster element in this novel, or hinted at as being trickster. One is rabbit and the other is coyote. So before we get to rabbit and coyote and explaining a bit of the history of trickster in literature, I want you to take or remember this as part of the daily writing. What animal other than rabbit or coyote would you use to symbolize a trickster? You can do it right now, pause and fill it out and then come back and finish, or you can just remember the question and come back and finish as well. We're going to be moving on, but if you had to pick an animal other than rabbit or coyote to symbolize a trickster, what animal would you pick and why? Again, leave it in the comments, and let's pick up the rest of the trickster. There's a lot of trickster things in pop culture. This character, the trickster, comes from the Flash comic. All right. Notice the clothes, notice the bright things, notice the almost jester-like quality of this character. And if you keep going, the trickster in early pop culture, way back, Punch and Judy shows, in the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s. Those sorts of elements are part of it. Again, that kind of jester-like clothes. I've got the Joker here because he fits into the trickster category. I think also when we look at some of the descriptions of the colorways that some of the or the color patterns that some of the characters are wearing, that works. And Harley Quinn, um, again, in that jester costume, ties into the tricksters throughout history. If we look at Coyote, he wore a dapper gentleman's suit right out of the Old West. His shirt was a high-collared affair tucked into trousers that were striped an outrageous crimson and olive and gold. Over the shirt was a double-breasted vest of the deepest red velvet. It was topped off with a golden puff of silver cravat embroidered with a delicate rose-colored brocade. Jeff Goldblum played a gambler and a trickster. His character name was Slick in the movie Silverado. And if you'll notice, there's the kind of fancy clothes, the tie with the cravat, the Old West gambler look. This is what Coyote is wearing. Also, a gold watch hung from the chain tucked in the vest pocket, and over his shoulder spread a camel-colored topcoat with a thick gray fur collar. The coat flared out around him when he walked like the mantle of a rogue king. He carried an engraved mahogany walking stick with a gold handle. And again, if you take a look at Goldblum's character, he's almost got that fur coat that he won from Water Monster around his, he's wearing that. It does seem to me that the trickster look for the Old West gambler traces itself back to Coyote stealing the fur coat. And this is kind of the expectation people had as they were thinking about the trickster, the gambler in the Old West movie for Silverado. And I think Mai and Roanhorse in her depiction, again, picks up this gambler thing. So the trickster, the clothes are a big part of the trickster. Coyote's a major mythological figure for most Native American tribes. They're notable for their crafty intelligence, stealth, and voracious appetite. One of the things I think you have to remember is that cartoons like Roadrunner, the coyote trickster was part of that. Okay? And so when we think about Coyote as trickster, I do think we have to play with this idea of pop culture has appropriated that from the Native American tribes and has taken it, has used it for advertising, for entertainment. Coyote as trickster is an important element of pop culture. In some Native American myths, he's the revered cultural hero who creates, teaches, and helps humans. In others, he's sort of an anti-hero who demonstrates the dangers of negative behaviors like greed, recklessness, and arrogance. In still others, he's a comic trickster whose lack of wisdom gets into trouble. In some, he's a combination of all three at once. As we read, we will see that Coyote helps put the stars in the sky. He certainly seems to be a negative role model, and he gets everybody in trouble. The question will be, can he help get people out of trouble? These are the elements of the trickster. Many, many cultures have tricksters, and almost all of the tricksters fit these three things at some point. In this novel, there's a question about whether there's another trickster. Maybe it's his clothes, a dark purple button-up shirt tucked into teal pants, the creases still sharp, and a silver striped tie, silver-colored dress shoes, and improbable on the res as a glass slipper. Notice the allusion to Cinderella, but notice that the Joker in some of the movies, we saw it at the beginning, the purple, the green, the teal or turquoise colored, and it's this idea that clothes are part of the trickster look. And whether the Joker's borrowing them, whether Harley Quinn borrows the European trickster look, it's part of the look. And here, that teal and green, I think, is an important part of the trickster appeal. We have the idea of Rabbit. We call him the Energizer Bunny several times. I think there's a slide coming up about that. But remember that we have had rabbits as tricksters in pop culture and advertising as well. The idea of tricks and the Trix rabbit playing tricks on people to get the Trix cereal. And so Rabbit as trickster has a long history as well. And please remember, we've had Bugs Bunny as a trickster forever, and he's the same sort of thing. And the rabbit trickster is generally a lighthearted character who does not engage in serious wrongdoing and features in many children's stories. So, as opposed to Coyote Trickster, who can seem to get into serious trouble, rabbit tricksters usually don't. So, if Kai is a trickster, he might be more lighthearted than Coyote, who seems to have that touch of evil about him. We have the idea of Brer Rabbit, who's kind of an African influence, and some southeastern tribes. Rabbit stole fire and brought it to the people. One of the first stories I ever heard was from an old book that my father got at an auction sale from an old country school, and it had a story about how fire came to the Indians. There was a relay race, and Rabbit was part of that. And so was Coyote, stealing the first ember and then giving to other animals as they ran it back to the people. And then very, very quickly, notice that Trickster Rabbit from the Cherokee Creek. There's all sorts of lists of tribes that have used the rabbit as part of the trickster tradition. Please remember, if you haven't done it yet, get that daily writing in. And we're going to pick up other elements of the novel on Friday. But I think it's important to understand that Roanhorse uses the dichotomy, that she uses both elements of the trickster in her story, in her novel. And I think it's important to think about the tradition of the trickster as you're reading through and looking at what Coyote does and doesn't do. Hope everybody has a good week. We'll pick this up. We'll pick up some of this on Friday and go from there.